Good afternoon. Crikey, it's scary when they read your whole biography out like that, isn't it? It didn't quite feel like an obituary, but maybe it was heading in that direction. I just wanted to add my thanks to the thanks that have already been expressed to Steve Mitchell, to Gary Laybourne, to Ian Budge and to Susanna de Sanchez Townsend for that incredible effort. I was stood outside when they cycled up here this morning to cycle 205 miles in like less than 15 hours is some effort, and we're very grateful, but I'm really impressed because there's no way on earth I'd be able to do that. I am aware as well that you've all just had your carbohydrate fix. So if anybody at any point feels the need to stretch in any form, if you can and you want to, please do, because I'd hate to feel that you're going to nod off in the time that I'm with you. It struck me as I was downstairs that actually out of the back window you can see one of the kinds of estates where StreetGames would work. So StreetGames supports an incredible network of around 1,600 community organisations that work in low-income, underserved communities. Those areas where young people grow up with lots of potential, but not a lot of money. And actually, whilst that is one of the challenges that those young people face, there are many others that living in a community like that will bring to them, and we'll probably touch on some of those as I talk through my presentation. But one of the things I'm really proud about is that the work that we do, and I'm joined by Sally Carr, who's at the back there, our place director in the Northwest, actually works with and alongside young people and communities to transform their lives through sport and physical activity. And the start of our journey really was back in 2011 when we first developed what we called our Us Girls programme. And some of what I want to share this afternoon is a little bit of the learning from that programme that still bears true. But I also just want to share with you some of the examples of how we put our learning into action, to recognise some of the things that have been achieved, but to also express the fact that, as we all know, in terms of engaging young women and girls in sport, there's so much more to do. And I'm going to redefine winning a little bit. We've probably heard from some organisations today who are all about the elite end of sport. We're very much about the community end of sport and what that means for girls and young women in terms of them winning. So some of the things that I'll share won't be a huge surprise to many of you that have been working around women's sport for a long time. And what we know, what we've known for a long time, is that there are a number of barriers, of course, to young women and girls being involved in sport, and particularly those from low-income households. Our founding chief exec, Jane Ashworth, who some of you will know, used to talk about the double jeopardy. So you're less likely to participate in sport if you're female. You're even less likely to participate in sport if you're female and you're from a low-income background, because that puts another layer of challenge in to get you involved in playing sport and feeling its benefits. And there are all the external barriers of whether or not there's something happening in your area, actually physically having access to sport, the challenge of having the right kit and equipment, all the areas around physical safety. Are there safe facilities for you to go to? But actually some of the things I probably want to touch more on this afternoon are some of those intrinsic barriers, some of those social challenges for young women and girls around their confidence, around how they may feel in terms of insecurity, and the need, and I recognise this in my own two daughters, the absolute need to connect sport with friendship and the sense that it has to be a social experience. When we developed Us Girls, we talked about fun, fitness and friends as the tagline for it, and that friends bit for young women was absolutely crucial. But we can talk, and we do, an awful lot about the barriers, but we know that there are motivators. Many of you in this room who are female and are athletes or are sports people will recognise the motivations that the girls and young women that we speak to talk about. But having fun is something that we just don't talk enough about in sport. Like, the primary reason why young people come back to it, whether they're boys or girls, is because it's fun. Because there is a great love of it. We can talk about all the benefits it brings to your employment and to your communication and all those kinds of things, but fundamentally, when you see children, young people running around enjoying themselves, that's absolutely at the heart of why they engage and continue to engage with sport. What we need to do, and what we try to do with the organisations we support, is help young women to really engage with those things that motivate them and remove some of those barriers that get in the way. But the way that we do that is with them. It cannot possibly be the days I remember when I first started in a local authority back in '99. Some of you remember this sort of period. We used to do consultation. So we used to ask young people what they thought, and then we would tell them what they were going to get. And that was the way that local government and many other areas have worked for years on end. But what we've learned as a charity, and actually I learned it in the early work we did with the youth volunteers, as was mentioned a minute ago, is that you don't just listen. You have to co-create. You have to reflect on what you're hearing together. And it's more than asking. And I think particularly with young women, it has to be more than asking in order to get ownership and to get that confidence. And the piece of work that's on the screen here, we did 2 years ago now. It's a piece of work called 1,000 Young Voices, and we talked to 1,000 young people, 50-50 pretty much in terms of boys and girls. And these are some of the things that they told us about that were really important, and some of the misconceptions perhaps about how passionate girls are about sport and physical activity. 67% of them said they wanted to play, but you'll recognise those motivators at the bottom that I mentioned, and you'll also recognise a bit more at the top there about the sense of identity and whether or not they feel sporty and some of those challenges for girls and young women in getting involved in sport. And again, in a room like this, I don't need to dwell for too long, you will recognise these headlines, but the environment and the context for young people, and particularly young women right now, is incredibly challenging. With issues like toxic masculinity, with the issues that particularly impact on young women around poor mental health. Some of the young people we spoke to post-COVID were telling us that for them the mental health issue was the pandemic that followed the pandemic. They could feel it in their schools, in their youth clubs, that their friends, everyone around them was struggling with their mental health. And then the facility issue, which again is common across sport, but it's really acute in deprived areas, because if they don't make money, then they're first to close. And it's likely that those facilities that are in the areas where they're most needed are the ones that make the least money and therefore are most at risk. So these wider environmental challenges are having a real impact on the young women that we work with. And the 6 factors that we've touched on already around mental well-being, we hear young women talk about the fact they don't want to ask their parents or their carers for money to go along to football because they can tell that the family's struggling with the cost of living. So asking for that £3, £5 to go to the training session. I've had young women say to me when I was in Cardiff a few weeks ago, I can't ask mum. These are very real day-to-day challenges for the young people in the communities that we're working in. And I know that all women are worried at one level about safety, but the areas that we're talking about here have very real issues going on around knife crime, around violence against women and girls in those spaces. And so it's more than that underlying fear of what's happening. It's some of the challenges and the realities of being in some of the neighbourhoods where we work. What's really interesting as you look at these 3 here is that the value of pre-engagement is one of the things that comes up as the 6th issue here. I think sometimes in sport we've been guilty of the build it and they will come approach. We'll put on a dance session and the girls will turn up. But actually what we learned with us girls is that you have to make them feel comfortable first. They have to feel like there's somewhere to plug their phone in if they need to charge their phone. There's somewhere they can get free Wi-Fi so that they can connect with their friends. There's somewhere they can get a drink. And all these things are so simple, they're not strategic. But actually, if we really want young women and girls to engage with sport, we've got to meet their social needs and their pre-engagement needs first. And a lot of those messages have come through young women talking to us about what it is that's important to them. We, as was mentioned in the introduction, we were involved in delivering a programme called Doorstep Sport Clubs between 2013 and 17. And there were some fantastic lessons from that programme in terms of the work that we continue to do with young women and girls. And particularly, again, many of these you won't be surprised to read about, but some of the ones I just pick out from this slide, the real value of peer promoters and motivators. It doesn't always have to be the coach. Sometimes I think we put it onto the trusted adult that they're the one that has to engage, to motivate, to get everybody moving. Well, actually, what we found through us girls is that in the right context and with the right support, the young women and girls that we engaged with wanted to be involved far more in the session. They wanted to play a collective leadership role. And in terms of some of the principles that we took from the learning that we've done both through the Us Girls programme, but from the work that's subsequently gone on in the last 2 or 3 years around women and girls, we have something at StreetGames that we call the 5 rights. But actually in this context, the 4 rights for young women and girls is really important. So the right people, having the right trusted adult that they feel confident in is absolutely crucial to whether or not they will engage and continue to engage in sport and physical activity. The style of the session, the way that the session works is really, really important for them, and their role in designing that style, the flow of activity versus time spent being on the phone, sharing messages, all of that is really important. The place is obviously crucial in terms of what we said about safety, but importantly for the young women we're talking about, it needs to be local as well. It can't be 7 miles away because they probably haven't got the money for the bus and they're probably not going to feel safe travelling to the other side of Manchester in order to get to a session. And the time is really crucial as well, because many of the young women that we work with will have lots of other commitments. They may be looking after siblings in a caring role. If their parents are working long hours, it needs to fit in with their needs and the work or the things that they have and are important to them. So I suppose just to summarise some of the key things that I think we're learning as we go on this journey. We have to take a relationship-first approach to community engagement of girls and young women. It's about their many social health needs first. Sport, absolutely, but if we don't understand the social health needs first, we won't get there. The first contact really counts. Like, if they don't feel welcome when they first turn up to the session, when they first turn up to the building, there's a very good chance they won't come back, which is true for all of us. I remember a horrendous experience I had at a tennis club once where I was made to feel like some sort of evil spirit and immediately walked out. But it's even more true for somebody with low confidence, feeling insecure and not sure whether or not they fit in. I've talked about the holistic approach, and the other thing that Sally and the team that have been doing the work that I'm going to talk about in a moment in Rochdale have done is they've used digital media as part of hearing the voices of young women and girls. So I know it seemed so simple when I heard about this, but actually making a video on your phone, making a selfie video, which my girls tell me I'm rubbish at, but they're very good at, and using that to feed back to the leader of the session about what's working, what they'd like to see. It's such a positive way of using a tool that every young woman almost certainly has with them as they come out. So being really creative and using digital as an enabler. I'm just going to talk about two specific pieces of work that have been happening in the last 12 months. The first took place in Rochdale and involved a group of 120 young women aged 8 to 19. And what's really interesting about that age group is that obviously we know the drop-off level of teenage girls is really, really high, but in the right context, which was a multi-sport festival, they all came along, 120 of them, and whilst they were there, they also had the opportunity to draw out their perfect view of what a facility would look like or a space would look like for them in terms of a youth space where they could be active, spend time with friends and do other things. And the power in that is that we were then able, Sally and the team were then able to share that with the local council and actually say, look, when you're thinking about the things that you want to provide for these young people, particularly these young women, this is what they're seeing. This is what they're envisioning. And obviously, you can't get into the realms of dry ski slopes or anything like that, but it was far more practical than that. It was about having a space that could really be theirs. And then the piece of work that's happening right now, which is a co-creation piece, again, it's not adults in the lead, it's working alongside young women to do a gender audit of a facility so that actually young women and girls can go in and talk about, are the changing spaces the way I want them to be? Have I got what I need when I'm in this space in terms of the activity mix? Have you got the right leaders and coaches that are needed? And training up some of the young women as young auditors, again, developing some new skills for them so that they can then use what they find to speak truth to power. So those are just two examples, quite small case studies, but I'm sure, as I've said on here, they can be taken from Rochdale and replicated. And from our point of view, as a charity, we'll continue to follow our journey around young women and girls. And importantly, we'll learn from and with them as we go, because we know we can bring expertise, but we're not the experts. Thank you for listening.